What's up guys, today I'm going to be going over the future of primaries in PvE in Destiny 2, and for the past several years at this point, SMGs have completely dominated the meta, and a couple weeks ago, the Destiny 2 team on Twitter finally tweeted that they got balanced pass coming for primary weapons in PvE in the mid-season, so that could be any week now, and when they said that, I wanted to make a video going over the balancing of primaries currently, and seeing where they stand and showing off how imbalanced some are, and then talk about what would need to happen to make them more balanced. But there's actually been a leak of what this balance change will be. So in this video, we're going to first go over how they stack up currently, and I'm going to do one RPM type of each weapon. Generally, the fastest RPM for the full auto, so 900 RPM SMG, 720 AR, a 540 pulse, and a 450 RPM sidearm. But then for the single shot weapons, I'm going to use the RPM type that was meta previously. So a 200 RPM scout and a 140 RPM hand cannon along with a bow. And we're going to first show off their DPS, which for a primary really tells you just how fast they're going to be killing things and how strong they're going to feel. And then applying the leaked buff to those numbers and seeing where they stand after this patch. So starting off with a 900 RPM SMG, all the weapons in this video will be energy. That way some of them aren't receiving the kinetic buff. And so hit for 2104 on the Dreg. Now looking at the rate of fire of one mag. It's going to be very quick at 2.4 seconds, which means DPS is 32.4 thousand for a 900 RPM SMG, which is very high for a primary. Next up will be a 720 RPM AR, once again with minor spec and no damage perk. It hits for 1609, which is already lower than the SMG, and the RPM, or it states that's going to be a slower RPM. So looking at one mag, takes 4 seconds, which means DPS is 19.7 thousand. The SMG is doing over 50% more DPS than the fastest RPM AR. Moving on to a sidearm of 450 RPM. These are going to hit really hard at 3883 per headshot. And look at the one mag rate of fire. It's going to take a little over 2.1 seconds, which means the DPS of a sidearm is 31.1 thousand, not that far behind the SMG. Now moving on to a 540 RPM pulse rifle. Looking at the damage, 2170 per bullet, which means the rate of fire of one mag was 3.8 seconds. So the DPS is a little bit better than AR at 20.5, but once again, both SMGs and sidearms are nearly 50% more DPS. And now for the single shot weapons with a scout, 200 RPM. It's gonna hit pretty hard at 6,249. Looking at rate of fire, one mag, 15 shots. It's going to take quite a while at 4.2 seconds, meaning DPS is a little bit better than the AR and Pulse at 22.3, but still a huge gap to the SMG and sidearm. Second to last to go is going to be a hand cannon, a 140 RPM. I'll hit for 9,132, which is a lot, but the rate of fire is going to be obviously pretty slow. 10 shots taking 3.9 seconds, meaning DPS is actually higher than the AR, Pulse, and Scout at 23,219, so not that bad. Then finally, the last primary in Destiny 2, a bow. Now bows are pretty complicated with their rate of fire because a lot of things change it. So looking at damage is going to be 23,245. And looking at the rate of fire with Archer's Tempo, because if you're like me, almost 100% of the time you're using a bow, you have this perk. So this was 9 shots, I believe, and it took 9.6 seconds, which means DPS is 21.7 thousand, so kind of right in there with a lot of the mid to long range primaries. So we throw up all the numbers on screen right here. As you see, the AR all the way down to hand cannon are kind of in the same ballpark of 20 to 23,000, and all those weapons are like the mid to long range primaries. Then you have the pair of sidearms and SMGs, which are nearly or even higher than 50% higher DPS than the rest of the field. And I think for the longest time, Bungie thought these were balanced because of the range. Obviously, these are the two close range weapons, while the others are all like mid to long range. And that is true. Obviously, range is a balancing part of primaries, but overall with the content in Destiny 2, most of the time, outside of maybe Grandmaster Nightfalls and maybe Master now because you're also 20 under, you can get as close as you want to enemies. So range was never really a huge part of the balancing in primaries for most things in the game, and definitely not to the factor of 50%. So while it obviously makes sense that the sidearms and SMGs should be the highest DPS, but probably not by a gap of 50%, that just is a lot. So the proposed buffs to these weapons, the SMGs and bows will stay the same. They're not going to receive any buff or nerf, but then the other weapon types are going to get a buff to both red bars and orange bars. Auto rifles are going to be a 25%. Sidearms, pulses, and hand cannons will all receive a 20% buff, and scout rifles will receive a 10% buff. So we apply those percents to the numbers and look at it again. The bow obviously didn't change and is now the lowest, but I still think bows will be a perfectly fine pick in really hard content, Grandmasters and Master, just due to the ability to one-hit red bars still. And these weapons that can one-hit things, it doesn't really matter what their DPS is, because, well, you killed it in one shot anyways, so I think bows will still be obviously very fine. But then you see the Scout, AR, and Pulse are basically all the exact same number now, and will feel really balanced, and they all kind of play in that mid to long range area. So these three weapon types will be honestly probably the most balanced things in the entire game according to these numbers. And then for hand cannons, I think hand cannons will feel very good now. As you see, their DPS is higher than all the other mid to long range weapons, but also with a hand cannon, once you throw on like a damage perk, just like a bow, if you can one shot the red bar enemies, it doesn't really matter what the number is. A one shot is a one shot, right? And if hand cannons can one shot things, they will definitely be extremely strong again and a very good pick. And then we have the SMG, which is still among the best in the game in terms of DPS, but whereas it was like 50% better than everything before, now it's only like 30% and even less compared to a hand cannon. So it's definitely be a lot more in line, and that feels so much better than everything else that who cares about range and you just use it no matter what. It's actually going to feel decent to put on a hand cannon, an AR, a pulse, a scout when you need a little bit more range, and you're not going to feel like you're giving up like literally all of your weapons damage. But that leaves us with the sidearms. As we showed off, the sidearms were already very close to SMGs in terms of DPS, and I've always been a huge sidearm fan. If there was a unique role on a sidearm, I would never be afraid to use it, while a lot of my friends would be like, you're crazy. And now with them receiving the same 20% buff as multiple of the other weapons in this list, as you see, their DPS is pretty high. Now, instead of the SMGs being like a 50% gap to the field, the sidearms are. And this isn't even with a damage perk or it being a kinetic. Kinetic sidearm would receive 10% more damage just for being a kinetic. And then if, let's say you have like multi-kill clip, a 50% buff. If you run the numbers, the DPS of the sidearm would be over 60,000. And that is like up there with basically special weapons, if not higher than some special weapons. So yeah, I think sidearms will literally delete once this update goes through, if these are the final numbers that we see on the live game. And will kind of be like that SMG situation all over again, where obviously sidearms are the least range, but they're going to do so much more damage than everything else that they're still going to be worth using. So it's going to be interesting to see how this one plays out. Overall, besides sidearms, I think the balance is going to be a lot better than it's ever been. And I feel like hand cannons are going to feel useful, SMGs will obviously feel useful, Scout, AR, and Pulses will all feel useful, but they might all just be outshined by sidearms. Anyways, if this is the update that goes through and sidearms are absolutely deleting everything, I might make a list of like the best sidearms to get if and when that happens. Anyways, let me know what you think about this potential primary balance patch. Like usual, thanks for watching. Catch you guys next time.